Talk today with Buzz Sodeman of Williamston, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, Buzz, can you start us off with some background on yourself? To begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Saginaw, Michigan, at Saginaw Osteopathic Hospital, March 3rd, 1947.
Okay. Now, did you grow up in that area, or did you move around?
No, grew up actually in the neighborhood until about the middle of the first grade. And I went to St. Andrew's School. Halfway through the first grade, I transferred. My parents moved to Emily Street, and I went to Saginaw St. Mary's Cathedral from that point until graduation. So I graduated from Saginaw St. Mary's.
Okay. And what did your family do for a living while you were growing up?
My father was the regional sales and service manager for the Whirlpool Corporation. He held seminars throughout the state and took care of any problems on major appliances. My mother was a nurse.
Okay. And how many kids were in the family?
Besides myself, there was a brother and a sister, both younger.
Okay. Now, when did you graduate from high school?
Graduated in 1965.
Okay. And then what did you do once you finished?
I went to Central Michigan for 1 year. Went from being in the National Honor Society to academic probation. Never opened a book. After 1 year at Central Michigan, I had a 1.9 grade point average. They were drafting gentlemen that had 4.0 grade point average, and I thought I didn't want to take a chance on getting drafted because I didn't want to go to NAM. And so I enlisted in the Navy on a 120-day delay program.
Now, when you went to enlist in the Navy, were they basically just accepting anybody who came and signed up, or did they try to screen people out, or how did that work?
At that point, they were still screening people. You had a battery of tests that you took, and I had already been to Fort Wayne down in Detroit and had the pre-induction physical, which I was told you never have to worry about going to Vietnam because your eyesight is to the point where if you lost your glasses, you'd be killing your own people versus killing the enemy. So I was pretty assured that I wouldn't go, but I didn't want to take that chance. So I enlisted, and from the time that I enlisted until the time I left for boot camp, there was a 120-day delay program. I got married to my first wife.
Okay. Now, why did you choose the Navy?
My dad served in the World War II in the Philippines, and his question to me was, do you want to sleep in a dirty foxhole, or would you like to sleep with clean sheets? And clean sheets sounded better to me, and I had two options, Air Force or Navy, and had I known that I was going to end up in Air Navy, I would have enlisted in the Air Force. But I didn't. I chose the Navy because of the clean beds.
Yeah. Oh, well. What did you know about Vietnam at the time you enlisted?
Not a lot that was good. I mean, I kind of sensed that the numbers that we were getting on a daily basis were inflated. I had contemplated going to Canada and becoming a draft dodger, but there's a tradition in the family. My father served. I had two uncles. One served, I believe, in the Marines and then the Air Force. So I wasn't going to cover it out, so I went.
All right.
My first duty station was after Great Lakes.
Well, let's go to Great Lakes first. Oh, also, when you did the physical originally, was there anybody around you who was trying to find some way to get themselves disqualified, either with pumping up with sugar or other things like that, or?
Not overtly. There was a black gentleman who I had to laugh because he had failed. If you failed, I believe, three of the exams, if you want to call them that, he had flat feet. He was too tall, and I believe he said he had a heart murmur. But he was having such a fun time running around with his with his wallet in his mouth that he wanted to see how many he could actually fail. But I didn't hear anybody just come right out and say, I did hear one thing about a bar of soap underneath in your armpit area, that would cause your heart to temporarily stop. I thought it was a little drastic. I didn't want to do that.
Okay, but basically most guys are just kind of going through and getting the stuff done. And...
just going with the flow.
All right. Now, when did you report to Great Lakes?
I reported to Great Lakes in January of '67.
Okay. And physically, how would you describe the place at that point? What does it look like when you get there?
I went in the wintertime, and we got off the train because we took a train from Detroit to Chicago, and then we were bused from Chicago to Great Lakes. And when we got off, immediately met our company commander, and we were put up in a barracks, which we found out was not the barracks we were supposed to be in. And then in the middle of the largest snowstorm and the worst one in 1967 for Chicago, we were marching around looking for our barracks, toting our sea bags in dress blues, freezing weather. Electricity went out, so we ended up getting a barracks we found that was open, and for 2 or 3 days we basically sat around on the floor, no heat, no lights, and of course, no food.
You might as well have been in the Army at that point.
At that point, yes.
Yeah. But they tend to train farther south.
Yeah.
All right. So did they find some way to get you some kind of food, or?
To be honest with you, I don't remember that part of it, but we did find our barracks, and the company commander we had. We were a very smart company, and they have what they call an E-flag, which is for intelligence. And we were getting constantly the E-flag because the guys we were with, we were all pretty knowledgeable. He wanted the drill flag. Well, somehow brains and marching don't seem to mix. We could never get that flag. So near the end of the boot camp. Now, we didn't have any physical training because of the snow and everything. He got us up at 3 in the morning, marched us to the hangar, and we did that 96 count manual until we just about dropped over. That week, we won his coveted drill flag, and we were one of the companies that left there with the most flags.
Now, what did the daily routine consist of in training that you can recall?
They would have specific classes like knot tying and Navy proper etiquette, that type of thing. During the knot tying, I stood watch at the barracks, an empty barracks, standing watch. So I do not know how to tie any knots. Grannies are the best ones for me. We learned how to, I hate to say this, we learned how to sew. We learned how to wash our clothes. We had two of the guys that were in our company. One was a semi-professional wrestler. He wrestled in college. And the other guy was a professional drag racer. And what we would do is we would take everybody's sheets and put them in the shower and plug the drain with these sheets. And then we'd sprinkle soap on them. And then we would have these wrestling matches, tag team wrestling matches, which would wash these sheets. And we, in all honesty, the boot camp was really kind of a joke for me because it's carried over though. I do put my clothes in such an order in my dresser. I've retained that. I dress with the military alignment where your buttons match your fly. That stuff is kind of stuck. But I was never really a great one for the authority in the military.
How much emphasis did they place on the military discipline aspect of things?
Quite a bit. I mean, in the Navy, you got quarterly marks. And in one of the times when I was in Vietnam, I did get a very low quarterly mark for lack of military discipline and military dress. They thought I was rather sloppy. However, they were also upset that I had officers' flight boots the entire time I was in Vietnam because I knew a storekeeper and he got them for me. and some of the officers didn't have those. They had the green canvas anti-pungy stick boots, and here I was with really nice flight boots.
All right. How long was the boot camp?
4 months. I left there, I believe it was in April.
Okay. And then what did they do with you then?
My orders, well, first of all, you take a battery of tests and they determine what you should be in the Navy. Mine came back something aviation, something bomb sight. And I thought to myself, this is not something I really want to get involved in. I could see myself looking through a little scope and telling the pilot to drop bombs here. So I left Great Lakes with that as the rate I was supposed to pursue. And it wasn't until I got to my first duty station, which was Lemoore, California, that I decided that I was going to pursue something else.
Okay. Well, was there a system in place that enabled you to ask for a change of specialization or training? Or
well, they came to me. There was one of the tests where you had to, it was like a Morse code type exam, and you had to figure out stuff. And then they had these foreign languages, which were, some of it was like Pig Latin and stuff like that. Well, I scored pretty high on that, and they approached me and said, would you like to go to language school? And I said, well, that'd be great. I thought, well, my parents were of German descent, and I thought I could go to German school and learn a language and talk to my grandfather and stuff. And needless to say, that school was filled. I had my choice between Russian and Vietnamese, and neither one of them really appealed to me. Although I assume if I would have taken either one, I'd have probably been assigned as interpreter probably at a headquarters of officers, and I didn't take either one of those.
So then, what kind of training did you get? What assignment then did you get?
Well, they just assigned me to a fighter outfit, VA 113, located in Lemoore, California. They happened to be in the Tonkin Gulf, but they were going to be coming back, so they put me in VA 125, I believe it was, and made me a plane captain on A4 aircraft, which is what VA 113 had. And so when they came from the Gulf of Tonkin, we had the barracks prepared for them, and they were going to do a quick turnaround, and I immediately became a plane captain of an A4, and it was the captain's plane, which I felt honored to be chosen to do his plane. He also had a trainer of some sort. I don't remember the technical term for it, but I was made the plane captain on that as well. Well, I had a chief who, he knew that I had no desire to go to the Tonkin Gulf, so he said, why don't you, I'll recommend you for Aviation Structural Mechanic Egress School, which is an A school. And he filled out the appropriate paperwork, and my next set of orders said Memphis, Tennessee, A school, and that's where I went as my second duty station.
All right.
That was an A school, so I had, I'm going to guess, 8 to 10 weeks of learning how to work on ejection seats, in particular the Martin Baker seat, and that pretty much, aviation structural mechanic encompasses everything from the engine repair and all of that, but we simply took classes in the ejection seat.
Now, how much time had you spent in California before that?
So wild guess, I'm going to say four months, maybe,
Okay.
5 months.
Okay, so you're there for a while. Then explain a little bit, what exactly is a plane captain?
A plane captain is an individual who has a plane assigned to him. It's his duty to maintain all the fluid levels and make sure that the plane is flight worthy. You check the tires, you check the oxygen level, you check the hydraulic levels, and then you direct the pilot when he leaves for a flight. it's kind of like the people you see at an airport that direct the pilots in.
Right. Now, did you have people who worked for you, or did you just do this yourself?
Did it all myself. Nobody worked under me.
So it sounds like an important job, a plane captain.
Yes,
but
it sounds
there's
important.
Just you.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So you did that for a while, and what part of California was that in?
It's actually in the San Joaquin Valley, not too far from Fresno. We set a record for the most days where it was over 100 degrees, and when it gets that hot, flights are usually they're either delayed or they're just I forget the term that I'm looking for.
Scrubbed or
scrubbed. There we go. And it was hot there, but yet you still stood 4-hour watches. You're out in the middle of nowhere, and they give you a nightstick, and you walk around these aircraft. I spent a lot of time getting to know praying mantises real well because I would tease them with the nightstick. They were always underneath the airplanes and stuff.
Now, how much was going on at that base while you were there?
From what the VA 113 was not a training outfit. The first one was that VA 125, or it could have been VA 121, I think is what it was. They basically prepared pilots that were checking into the seagoing outfits. So once you were a plane captain, you were a plane captain until you either were deemed capable of working in the shop, which in my case would have been a shop that worked on ejection seats, or if you were kind of a flunky, you were a plane captain the whole time. Not really impressive. You spent a lot of time on the flight deck. Having been on a flight deck, that's no place I wanted to be. So there was a lot of negatives that were going on at this early stage.
All right. But then you go on to Memphis, you train on the ejection seats, you're there for a couple of months.
Yep.
And then where do you go next?
Well, before I left, that's when Martin Luther was shot down there. Now, I never left that base except for that weekend. I had made arrangements. One of the guys that I was in training with said, "Hey, we need to get away from the base. We're going to go down to where I live in Hardy, Arkansas." When I told the commander of our barracks that I was going to go, and he said, "No, you're not." And I said, "Look, I haven't left this base. I am going to go to Hardy, Arkansas." His exact words were, "If you get pulled over on Beale Street," because there was a curfew of 6 p.m., "if you get pulled over and get thrown in jail, you are going to rot in that jail because I will not get either one of you out." At 5 minutes to 6, we crossed from Beale Street onto the bridge that led heading towards Arkansas. Right. And we spent the weekend in Arkansas, and we actually came back to the base well before 6 o'clock. And I think about 2 weeks later is when we graduated from AMEA school.
Okay. Now, were the guys you were training with, were they pretty much all white, or were they racially mixed? Or
I don't remember any black people being in the class. I'd have to check the class picture, but I'm sure we were all white.
Okay.
And I graduated in the top third.
Now, on the base itself, after King was killed, were there any issues?
Oh, yes. There was a main highway that went between where the barracks were and the flight line, or where the schools were, and they closed that off. So there was a period where we didn't have any classes. You just spent time laying around the barracks or trying to entertain yourself.
All right. Okay, so once you kind of get to the other side of that, then do they let you go home before you go to Vietnam, or do they send you to another station, or what do you do?
Actually, you had a 30-day leave if you wanted to take it. And my orders said, you have, in the Navy you can volunteer. So I thought, well, it'd be nice to be on the East Coast after being on the West Coast. So I volunteered for a base in New Jersey. And of course, anything that you volunteer for in the Navy, you don't get. So my orders read, going out to Miramar in San Diego to another flight outfit. So I took 30 days leave, and loaded up my wife and my daughter and drove without a home to San Diego and spent time looking for a place to stay. The first couple, I think the first couple days, we stayed at a motel on the beach. And then after that we found a duplex, and we rented a duplex in just outside of Old Town San Diego. And then I would drive to the base every morning.
Okay. I don't know, was military pay decent in those days? I mean, could you afford to support a family like that, or?
It really wasn't bad. What we did find, though, that there was some stuff that you could buy at the commissary that was higher priced than what you could buy it for off base. In particular, meat products. So we split our time equally between the commissary and the I think it was Safeway where we did our shopping.
All right. And then what was your job then on the base?
Well, I get to be a plane captain on an F-4 Phantom jet. But what's interesting is I was on that base for 4 to 6 weeks, and they had no concept of who I was. You would muster in the morning, they'd call your name, I'd say here, they'd dole out who had what duties. I never heard my name called, and I got to the point where I was wearing my civilian clothes underneath my dungarees, and I would go and I'd pick up my wife and my little girl, and we'd go out on the beach and swim and get sunburned. So for 6 to 8 weeks, they had no idea who I was. Then finally somebody said, how come this Sodeman guy he's not in his shop? Well, he hasn't even been a plane captain yet. So they rushed me through being a plane captain on an F-4, which sometimes involved, because this was another training outfit, it would involve us, the pilots would come in, and we had really long runways there. They didn't have to deploy a parachute to slow these jets down, but they would, and they would come to a certain area near the fuel area, and you'd stand behind the jet, and you'd pull the parachute. There would be another guy that would go like that to the pilot. He'd cut the chute, and then you'd have the chute, and eventually you would take it to the parachute riggers to pack up. Then you'd fuel. That was something else separate. So you had to do the chute thing, you had to do the fueling, you had to learn about the idiosyncrasies of an F-4, which design-wise was never supposed to get off the ground. But it had 2 huge engines. So I became a plane captain. I don't think I was plane captain more than a week, and I was back in the shop working on ejection seats. And because we were a training outfit, I got to train a lot of people that were going to go out to seagoing outfits on how to remove the seat, how to remove the entire structure, because there's more than just the seat involved. And so I became an instructor, more or less. And at that time, they had the man-hour accounting system in the Navy. And if you could account for 40 hours, or actually 8 hours a day, you got to leave early. Well, I could pull a seat bucket in less time than what the manual said you could do it, but you got credit for the time. So there were many days when I didn't have duty that I would be in there at 8 in the morning, and I'd be home by noon because I'd have my 8 hours accounted for in 4 hours.
Okay, so not too bad a deal here.
No, not too bad of a deal.
Was there an expectation that sooner or later everybody goes to the Tonkin Gulf or to Vietnam or something, or were you hoping maybe you just get to stay in California the whole time?
I was actually hoping to stay in California. I mean, the duplex that we lived in was rather nice. Of course, living in San Diego, on January 1st, you're out cutting the grass. There's a lot of things to do there. So I kind of thought I would be there the rest of my tour. And I was there approximately a year and a half. And then I got orders that actually I had come home for 30 days leave, which the Navy doesn't know about. And while I was home, and at that time my parents had moved to Frankenmuth, Michigan. I got orders. My mother got the message on the phone that I was headed for Binh Thuy, South Vietnam. So when I came home that day, there was a lot of tears because she looked up Binh Thuy, and there's two of them.
Mm-hmm.
One's up in North Vietnam, and then there's the one where I was at down in the Delta.
Oh.
So the orders then said, because you're going there, you need survival school. So my orders read Coronado, California. So I had flown home from Miramar, San Diego, which was at that time called Fighter Town. Then the Marines have since taken it over. And then I went back to the base, packed up all our stuff, and was driving in the middle of the winter, and we were stranded in Flagstaff, Arizona. And I ended up coming home, taking another 30 days leave, which the Navy did know about, and then left my wife and daughter in Saginaw, and I flew to San Diego in Coronado.
Out of curiosity, how do you take a 30-day leave without the Navy knowing it?
You get to know a personnelman real well, and he tells you what time to leave and what time to return so that he's there. And when you hand him your leave chit, just miraculously disappeared.
Okay.
Slightly illegal, but a lot of people, you knew, in the Navy you get to know storekeepers and personnelmen. Because personnelmen can do that for you, and a storekeeper can get you anything that you want. Yeah, there's certain favors you do, but basically those are the two people you make friends with.
All right. So now you get to Coronado. What did the survival school consist of?
4 weeks of telling us how to handle wounds, how to survive in the harshest conditions, and watching guys prepare themselves to be SEALs. And I'm thankful I wasn't a SEAL after what I saw there. But if you were headed up towards North Vietnam, the DMZ area, you actually left the base for, I think it was 3 days, and you went to a place, I think it was called Silver Springs, California. Has a very diverse climate there. And they told us a little bit about it. They take you up in a bus, and they give you a box lunch, which you eat on the way. But what they didn't tell you is that was going to be your last meal for 3 days. And then they turned you loose in this compound, and you had to try to evade capture during that 3-day period. And they had told us the story of Dieter Dengler, who was a Navy pilot who escaped twice after he was captured there. And they also, what they did is they weighed you before you went in, and they weighed you when you left there. Dieter Dengler is the only person at that time that had gained weight. And when asked how he gained weight, he would sneak into where the officers had their mess, and he would get into the trash can. And as most Americans don't clean the meat totally off the steak bones, he was eating what was left over of the steak. And he wanted to stay one more day because he had another plan that he wanted to use to see if he could escape. Well, it was later determined that he escaped from being a POW in Vietnam, and that was the third way. And in San Diego, there's a historical air museum, and they actually have his uniform and his underwear that he had sewed with certain things, but he had survived. And that was all there. But basically, how to treat a wound if one of your guys got shot, you think of maggots. And the way it is maggots only eat dead material. Once the maggots get done eating the dead material, that would provide you food. And it sounds gross, but everything that they said, like the heat in Vietnam is so oppressive that it would not be unheard of coming down with heat exhaustion or whatever. And you could, you're supposed to urinate on your comrade because that would be a cooling once it hit hit his skin and the air hit it, it would cool him down.
Mm-hmm.
But we learned all of that stuff for 4 weeks exactly.
Okay. Now, how much of it was sort of classroom or lecture kind of thing, and how much was actually going out and doing stuff?
100% classroom.
Okay.
For me, I was headed to the Delta. They knew where you were going, and because I was headed down into the Delta, they didn't give me. I just had 100% classroom.
Mm. And was the Delta understood to be quiet at that point, or relatively so?
As explained by the instructors, there's no front line in Vietnam. No matter where you go, could be a hot zone, and you're always subject to attack.
Mm-hmm.
You don't trust anybody. And then you got, they gave you the required shots for going over there, and the worst one was the bicillin. It felt like a huge golf ball being put in your rear end, and then they would hit it because the penicillin is real thick, and in order to disperse it, they would punch it, and of course a lot of people bled from the needle, getting it in the rear end, and we were in dress whites, and we left with dress whites.
With red spots?
With red spots. In my case, I didn't have the red spot, but that's probably I do have a very deep phobia for needles. Probably started in boot camp with the air guns that they used to give us the shots. You'd walk through a doorway and there'd be a corpsman on either side and they'd nail you. And then the shots that we got before we left Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. Now, did they explain the logic of giving you a bunch of antibiotics when you didn't have anything yet?
Yeah, because of what we were going to encounter when we were there. I believe we had some kind of a malaria shot, and then the bicillin was to pretty much take care of anything. At that time, penicillin was the end-all of all. And I can't recall anything else that they prepared us for. They did prepare us for the oppressive heat. Oh, and the customs of the Vietnamese people, because it's not uncommon to see Vietnamese guys walking down the street with their hands in each other's back pocket, and we were not to misconstrue that as them being gay. So there was a class in the culture that we were going to be going to, which even the class couldn't prepare us for what we saw.
All right. So you've had your training and so forth. Now, did your wife and kid, did they stay in California? Did they go back to Michigan, or
they stayed in Michigan?
Okay.
And the one thing I remember most vividly is when we left San Francisco on our way to Vietnam, we stopped to refuel in Hawaii. And when we took off, it was probably the most beautiful sunset I'd ever seen. And my immediate reaction was, that's probably the last one I'll ever see. I really didn't think I would come back. So it was a very vivid memory.
All right. Now, when was it then that you actually got to Vietnam?
September in 69.
Okay. Now, over the course of those past 2 years, had you been following the news about the progress of the war and that kind of thing?
Yep. And people that had been there, albeit on the Tonkin Gulf, were telling me how the numbers were inflated, and that in some cases we weren't doing as good as the paper made us sound. And of course, we get the daily feedback about riots and like at Kent State, and the general discord of the American public. So that was even going on before I left.
Because some people were not all that aware of it even at this late day. It just varies from person to person. But in your case, you were paying attention.
Yes, I religiously watch the news. When newspapers are available, I'll read, and so I was pretty much prepared, somewhat. I mean, there was a cultural shock when you got there.
All right. Now, take us. You flew out of San Francisco, did you say?
Flew out of San Francisco International Airport.
Right. Then Hawaii, and then
Philippines.
Okay.
And we landed there during the monsoon. And we landed at night, and I remember a lot of the Filipinos in the terminal, because it was not an air terminal, it was a passenger for civilians, and it was raining so hard that the lizards were coming out of the walls. And they were, they looked at us like we were totally foreign to them. That was kind of a cultural shock. But, between the oppressive heat and the monsoon, by now those whites are pretty much wilted and they're turning gray.
Mm-hmm. All right. So they were flying you on commercial jets?
Commercial jets.
Were these chartered for the military, or did you have civilian passengers too?
No, just the military.
Okay.
We did have stewardesses. They were very gracious. Just prior to landing at Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base in Saigon, they came down the aisle spraying us with an insecticide, which is kind of hilarious that for what we saw in Vietnam, and they're thinking we're going to be bringing bugs in, was just ridiculous. And it was at that point the stewardesses were crying, and that the reality set in is like we're going here, and this is not good.
All right. And then what's your first impression of Vietnam once you get off the plane?
Dirty, highly congested. I found the women rather appealing and attractive, even though they're, that they wear those Audis, which are custom fit from the waist up, and then they have the long tails. And then either a black pajama bottom or a white, and they add colors also. But the noise, the dirt, the filth, and the shops were, they're open air shops, and as I just wasn't prepared for that. And I had visited Tijuana, and I thought Tijuana was the pits. Well, this was a totally different scenario that I was in, and of course. As I told you before, we were herded into a bus, and a Marine come on and said, your life expectancy from the time you set foot on the tarmac until we get to where you're going to go is, like 13 seconds or whatever he gave us. And by now we're all wide-eyed, and then he says, oh, and on the way to where we're dropping you off, if somebody rides by on a motorcycle and puts a hand grenade on the cyclone fencing, which covered the windows, you got to knock it off, or because it'll blow the bus up. So now, not only are you wide-eyed, you're scared, and fortunately, we made it to where they called the Hotel Saigon, and that's where I spent my first night.
All right. Now, was this actually an old hotel or a barracks of some kind? Or?
It was an actual hotel. It was surrounded with cyclone fencing. They had been hit, and they had pictures of what these grenades or whatever the Vietnamese used, the VC, and the damage that was incurred, and they impressed upon you that if you stood a watch, which I was almost guaranteed to stand watch because I was an old man according to them. And I had a year of college, which did not help. That you had to be aware, and you had to keep people moving, nobody in front of the hotel. And then, as like a joke, you got a flak jacket, a helmet, one shotgun shell, a shotgun, and a whistle. And that was, you stood out there behind this fencing and made sure nobody stayed in front of that hotel for any longer than 10 or 15 seconds.
And how easy or hard was that to do?
Well, it wasn't hard standing there, but traffic, you have the United States military traffic, their troop haulers and stuff, and they're barreling along at 60 miles an hour, and then you had Jeeps, and then the Vietnamese people were on what I would consider a motorbike, not a motorcycle, a motorbike, and they're bumper to bumper. They're staying out of the way of these military transports, and there was one gentleman who was longer than the 10 or 15 seconds, and he wasn't responding to the whistle, and I can whistle pretty loud, so I whistled, and then that caught his attention. I racked that shell in the shotgun, and somehow, in amongst all this turmoil, he found a place to get his motorbike, and off he went. But it was this constant noise and dirt and congestion. It was disconcerting, to say the least.
Okay. Now, was this a place that had personnel from different services stopping over, or were you all Navy? Or
the area where I slept that night was all Navy. I don't know about if there were other branches of the military there or not. I didn't ask a lot of questions. I pretty much kept my mouth shut and just kind of hung with the guys that I flew over with.
You basically come in, you show them your papers, and then they just tell you go here, or in your case, go out and stand watch for 4 hours, or
yep, stand to watch for 4 hours. It's the only watch that I stood at the Hotel Saigon, and then I don't remember exactly how many days I was there, maybe 3 at the most, and then they put me on a C-130, and they flew me to Binh Thuy, which would be south, and I don't remember. I believe it landed. There was an Air Force base near the base where I was stationed. I believe we landed there, and then there was either a Jeep or because I was the only one. There was 2 of us, both AMEs, and both headed to the same place. So I believe they picked us up in a Jeep and drove us to Binh Thuy.
Now, when you're out there, are they still telling you scare stories and things, or do they just drive you?
No, they didn't sugarcoat anything. They really didn't tell us a lot about the base. For one thing, it was in the monsoon season, so I mean it's pouring rain, and I've never seen rain come down this hard. It was sheets, and that also was the first time I ever saw walking catfish. Walk right down the road at the base. Just sweet as ever, and they walk with a waddle. Reminded me of the way a Pekingese moves in a show ring, but it's the first time I'd ever seen one. I was a plank owner at the base, which meant that I was one of the first people there. There was no running water. Then the Army supplied us with water buffalo, which contained the potable water.
That was just a big tank, or?
Yeah, it's I equated it with a fuel truck. It was that big and it held water. That was drinkable. They had plumbing. I mean, we had what the Navy calls a head. And that's our clock. Okay. Sorry, I can't do anything about that. The plumbing was in. We actually had toilets. We had showers. If you were dirty and you took a shower, you came out dirtier than what you went in. And at some point, the sewers backed up, and it was about that point where I had dysentery, and I would go down and wade through ankle-deep sewage to sit on a toilet that was overflowing. But because I was raised that that's what you do, I added to it because I had a severe case of the diarrhea.
Okay. Now, did you have corpsmen who could treat you for that, or
we had a box C, which is the Vietnamese term for a doctor, and he was a black doctor, very nice man. I don't think I've ever met a nicer man than him. And they gave me charcoal briquettes to chew on. That was supposed to harden the stool, so to speak, and get rid of the dysentery. And eventually it did go away.
How long do you think you were sick?
Probably 3 weeks.
Wow. And you still had to do your regular duties while you were sick?
Yes.
Yeah. And what did your duties consist of down there?
Okay, when I got there, there were no Martin Baker ejection seats. So I wasn't qualified to work on the ejection seat of an OV-10A, which is it's called the Mosquito. It's there's a pilot and a co-pilot, and they fly very low to the ground. And they had a different kind of a seat. I don't remember what kind it was. And being that we were a support unit, they had their own AMEs to work on these seats. So they said, we're going to make you a parachute rigger. So they put us in this shop. I probably should describe the shop. The entire hangar, our shop was one of the first ones as you went in the main door. To the left was our shop. To the right was where the officers hung out. And at that time, each shop was separated by cyclone fencing. So you, in essence, could look the entire length of the hangar and see every shop. Eventually, they brought in civilian contractors, and they built walls, and they put in air conditioning. So, being a parachute rigger, that shop and the officers were the first ones to get the air conditioning and the walls up.
So why does parachute rigging get priority? Is it because of the fabric? Or?
Because of the fabric, which we never saw. Never. The only parachute I saw was I asked somebody for it to put over my rack, my bed. But we worked on life vest. They have a shark repellent. They have a dye, a green dye that if the pilot shut down over the ocean, they can throw this dye out there. It'll turn everything kind of a fluorescent green so you can spot them from the air. They had a shark repellent. They had some tracking devices, electronic things that we had to check. We had to change the CO2 cartridges in them and make sure that they had a shroud knife in every vest. So we worked on vest, we worked on helmets. That probably, as I told you, trauma sets in when you get your orders for Vietnam. But I worked on a helmet, and I never thought about looking inside of it. I was working on it, and I pulled down, the helmets have you can turn this little screw and then sunglasses come down. And when I did that, there was a hole through one of the lenses. And as an afterthought, I turned the helmet over, and I've been working on a helmet which had the top of somebody's head in it. And unbeknownst to me, I'd been working on this, and then when I saw that bullet hole, that's when I turned it over, and here was partial skull with hair. It was all dried and matted, and we ended up, I believe, throwing that helmet away. So that, other than the trauma of being in Vietnam, then I had that.
All right. Now, what was the area kind of around the base physically like?
Okay, if you were looking at the base from the north, there was a civilian road that ran from down in the Delta to the third largest city in Vietnam, which is Can Tho. On the north side of the base, that was the Brownwater Navy, which we eventually turned over to the Vietnamese. And then on my side of the base, which looking at it from the north, or the road, on the left you had a civilian concrete plant that every night before I went to bed I'd have to clean my rack off because there would be this fine concrete dust that had infiltrated through the screen and then onto my bed. That's one of the reasons I had the parachutes, to keep the concrete dust off my bed and the spiders. And then as you looked at the base, to the right there was our airfield, which the OV-10As landed on, as well as the HAL-3 helicopters. Then the next base over was Medevac, Army Medevac, and then to use an Army term, a few clicks down the road was an Air Force base.
The country itself, was it flat?
I would consider it flat. When you were up in the towers standing watch, there was next to the concrete place, between the concrete place and our base, was rice paddies. Further looking to the south, there was a forest, which you could see firefights going on if you were standing watch. They would call in the Cobras, which was rather interesting because every fifth shell was a tracer, and all you saw was red going into the forest, and then there was this delay, and then you'd hear the hum of the Gatling type gun, and then you'd see the Vietnamese shooting back. You'd see a couple of tracers go up, which seemed to irritate the helicopter pilots, and they'd come back and they'd open up another barrage on them. So that was probably maybe a football field or 2 football lengths away. Okay. And then there was a road between the rice paddies and our base, the perimeter of our base, and it wasn't uncommon to see prisoners being marched down that road. They were using them for labor. The Arvins were using them as labor, and they'd come by and make up signs to us and that type of thing. But we knew they were prisoners.
All right. Now, did the base itself ever get sniped at or hit with anything?
To the best of my knowledge, before I got there, had never taken a mortar round or anything. We went under a red alert twice while I was there, which means that the perimeter had been breached, but neither time it hadn't. My duty station when we went under a red alert was my office, because that's where the armory was. And the first time I was standing watch, nothing happened. And then all the lights go off and then the red lights come on. The second time we went under the red alert, I was what was called a single digit midget. I was scheduled to leave in a week. And I went to the duty station, and when they opened up the armory, they asked me what kind of a weapon I wanted. And I told them I wanted the M79 grenade launcher, because I figured if they made it to the door of the paraloft, that I was going to take a bunch of them with me. Because you don't even have to aim that at that close. And I sat on what looked like a bar stool with my arm on the folding table. We had a huge table that was probably 20 to 30 foot long. And I rested my arm with that M79 until the all clear was given. Now, I do understand that probably a week after I left the base, that they came in through the front gate. I don't know if there was any fatalities. I don't know a lot of the details. I didn't get on the other details, but I do know they came in the front gate.
All right. Now, did you have regular watches you had to stand or take turns guarding the perimeter and that kind of thing?
Yeah, usually it was up in a tower, and the towers were approximately 30 feet in the air, and they were made out of metal, and you went up a ladder, and they had a machine gun and an M16, and they gave you a helmet and a flak jacket. And the longer I was there, I guess the more comfortable I kind of became, because I would stand to watch with a white t-shirt on and this flak jacket, and I did catch hell from an officer one night about what a target I made. It was like in the southeast corner. I don't think I ever stood any other watch except for that tower, and it looked down each side. And that when you stood there for 4 hours.
And did you ever see anything?
Rats. Rats below the ladder, which I asked permission to shoot at, and they wouldn't give it to me. But other than the prisoners, if you stood a day watch, you'd see the prisoners, or you'd see an Arvin out in the rice paddy bathing himself. This was a total. Saigon was bad, but Binh Thuy is like in the middle of nowhere. The river was not only the washing machine and the dishwasher, but it was also the toilet. And I remember these wooden planks leading out over the river. And they had a little box at the end of them, and that was the toilet. And it would not be uncommon to see somebody in that toilet and not 20 feet down the river, a mama-san washing dishes or doing her laundry.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I watched many an Arvin bathe himself in the rice paddies. But they did wear clothes when they bathed, their underwear, which was a hard commodity to keep in Vietnam.
Why is that?
Because if you had mama-sans do your laundry for you, they would steal your underwear because they liked to wear them. In my case, they in first couple of months they had dry rotted. Mm-hmm. There was nothing left. Now, one of the things about my father being a regional and service manager for Whirlpool, I was able to get 2 washing machines and 2 dryers for the Paraloft, because a good Paraloft has those, that's part of what they have. Mm-hmm. So Whirlpool generously sent 2 washers, 2 dryers, and because I was involved with the Catholic priest, we would go into an orphanage into Canto, and to see the facilities that those nuns worked under, I was able to get 2 washing machines and 2 dryers for the orphanage. Unfortunately, my tour ended, but I taught somebody else how to hook them up. To the best of my knowledge, that orphanage had 2 washers and 2 dryers.
Right. Yeah, how much contact did you have with the Vietnamese population, either civilian or military?
Very little with the military. Father Conovad was the Catholic priest that was stationed there at Binh Thuy, and I got to know him very, very well. I'm not a real devout Catholic. I had to go to church almost every day at St. Mary's, and I never thought I would go to church every day in Vietnam, but I went to Mass every day, and the priest and I became quite close, and he would tell me about this orphanage, and then we would go into town. He had a scribe, or as they're called in the Navy, they're referred to as titless waves, but they're a personnelman. And we'd hop in the Jeep, and we'd go into town, and we'd visit the orphanage and see the children, and they'd sit on our laps, and they'd sing Vietnamese lullabies to us, and I seriously had considered adopting. There was 2. I wanted to bring back an orphan that looked French. I didn't want to bring back one that looked Vietnamese, because I didn't want that particular child to grow up in an American school with somebody whose dad maybe had got killed over there. Mm-hmm. So I was looking for one that looked French, and I found one. Her name was Milan, and I found out later she had been adopted, and the other little girl, I don't remember her name, she had also been adopted. So after that, I really didn't want to bring one home. Mm-hmm. But I had a lot of contact with the orphans. The priest was often invited to a village chieftain's birthday or anniversary. They celebrated a lot. Mm-hmm. So we would go, and they'd invite us to these celebrations, and they'd feed us. That's probably one of the reasons I got the dysentery. Mm-hmm. I asked them what we were eating, and they said jungle dog. And when I think back, I think that it was the intestines of a dog, and I don't think those intestines had been cleaned of what was in them. Mm-hmm. And then they had some kind of what we would call this is Japanese rolls, egg rolls, mm-hmm. and they had shrimp in them, and the shrimp weren't cleaned real well. They had shell in them, mm-hmm. and sake, rice sake, yeah. which had been aged for 100 years, we were told, and it was very potent. So we did a lot. I had a lot of contact. We would go to a restaurant. In fact, I had a postcard here. It's called Olga's, air-conditioned restaurant. It was in Canto. There's a phone number and everything. It says the best American, French, and Chinese cuisine. And a steak sandwich would cost 100 piastres, and French fries were 80 piastres. And it had a little map on the back on where this place was located, and then somebody had written on this one where the Playboy bar was. I only went to a bar once.
Now, what was the restaurant like? I mean, was it as advertised?
It was as advertised. One day the scribe felt rather adventurous and ordered pigeon under glass.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think he was rather shocked when it came on this platter, the wings out like this, the head still on with the beak and everything, and the servers were trying to get him to eat the brain of this pigeon, and he wouldn't do it, so I did, and you know, they thought that, you know, I was GI number one because I ate this, which apparently has a real significance to them. So I had pigeon brain and a steak sandwich. I always ordered steak sandwich, and I used, they make Nook Mom, and I would put Nook Mom as my A1 sauce on it, and it was very good, although I do believe it was water buffalo, not beefsteak. Like I mentioned, I went to the bar once. You probably have heard terms where they would say, GI buy me tea. Well, tea turns out to be root beer, and it comes in a little glass about this tall. I don't know how many piastres it cost for it, but that entitled you to sit with a Vietnamese bar girl. And I had some rather, that one time, only one time I went to that bar, was a rather strange situation.
All right. This tape is talking about your one time in a Vietnamese bar, and you said it's just kind of a very strange sort of experience.
Yeah, I went in with one of the guys that worked in my shop. His name was Eric Roof, lives in Humboldt, Kansas, and he talked me into going, and we took our own booze. We had bought from the commissary at the Army base next to us, and we went to the bar, and we basically pretty much ordered a mix. We had our booze, and there were two bar girls that came and sat next to us. We bought them that root beer type drink, and then there was one girl who thought we were there for other reasons, and she came down 3 different times. The second time, well, first time she was dressed in Western type clothing, Western type bell bottoms and tight fitting. The second time she came back and she had a little less clothes on, and the third time she came down she was totally naked, and her, you know, you want me now, GI, you want me now, and of course both me and Roof, who were probably getting plastered with the booze we had bought, basically said Diddy Mao, which is get out of here. And she had a newspaper all wadded up, and she set it on fire and tried to burn us. And Mama San came down and slapped her around, and then there was a commotion outside, and Papa San ran out, and the next thing I know, he's back in, and he slit on his head. According to him, VC had attacked him and hit him with a machete, and my buddy Roof, he went running out. He was going to kill himself with Viet Cong, and that never materialized. And I remember he put his fist through the wall of the bar. About this time, I'm ready to leave, and we would go and we'd stand at a central location where the troop transporters would come through, and they would see you there, and they'd stop, and you'd tell them where you had to go, and then they would be going right through your base, so they would drop us off, and that's how we got back to the base. Now, I did go into town one other time. There was a cook, a Vietnamese woman cook that worked in the galley. Her name was Co Doi, and she knew exactly how I wanted my eggs, my bacon, my toast, and there could be a long line of officers and chiefs, and she'd motion for me to come, and she had my breakfast ready. And she invited me to her house one night, and I went to the place. I wanted to see how she lived. It can best be described as a concrete building, no door, kind of a shotgun type thing, long. She cooked a meal, I think it was steak, and pulled out a Sears catalog, an old Sears catalog. She wanted me to write home to my wife and tell her that I was sakmaud, which is killed. And then I would stay there with her and order her all this stuff from this Sears catalog. And as the night went on, I realized that I was past curfew, and we weren't allowed to ride in those little rickshaw type things with the motorcycle and the little cab. And I didn't have any money with me. I didn't take any money. And so she paid for one of those things to take me from Canto to the base. And of course the guards, the MPs, saw me pull up in it and never said a word. And that was my only other journey where I wasn't with the priest. I went once to the bar, and I went once to this lady's place to see. I think she had 3 or 4 kids. Her husband had been, he didn't enlist, I can tell you that. He was voluntarily ripped from the house and was fighting.
Yeah.
So that's my trips into Canto. And in Canto, on your way there would be little villages, and they would have those like that picture showed, these little places where they would sell stuff that was still alive, crawling around in a container, and Coca-Cola, which we were not allowed to buy because the VC had a way of putting ground glass in them and keeping a little bit of effervescence in them. So if you bought one and opened it, it would look like the bubbles, but in actuality it was ground glass. So we weren't allowed to buy any of that kind of stuff.
All right. Now, the base you were on, did it have a lot of activity with aircraft going in and out? Because you were mentioning you had the helicopters fighting locally. Was that kind of a constant thing?
That was a constant thing. Operations generally ceased at night. I mean, the control tower was very primitive. Not like you would picture Tri-City Airport or Lansing International. It was rather primitive. The Box C had a python that he kept in underneath the control tower in this container, and they'd come across on the intercom, Dr. So-and-so snake's going to be eating, we're going to be feeding it chicken. And you'd go over and you'd watch this python eat a chicken, which after being over there, when I came back, I did have snakes. I had pythons, so that kind of rubbed off on me. But there were 2 gentlemen, but there was the Box C and one of the guys in I believe it was Val 4, the OV-10A pilots. They had a python. And I can remember they put out little newspapers called the Jack Staff, and they talked about the doctor's python getting loose, and it got run over by a Jeep. And they made a big deal about how the doctor took the snake and put it under an x-ray machine to see if there was any broken cartilage and all of that. But that was my first experience with anything huge, snakes.
Now, while you were there, let's see, did you have the USO come through?
Several. One that I didn't show you before was some National Football League players came through. And the helicopter brought them in, and they had Playboy girls ushering them around. And I was fortunate enough to meet every one of them. There's 3 that stand out in my mind. One was Chris Hanberg, who played for the Washington Redskins. There was Gary Garrison, who played for the San Diego Chargers, and Jim Nance, who played for the Boston Patriots. And they went around and they would, stop and talk to you and shake your hand and thank you for being there. The Miss America tour came in. The Paraloftus, where they chose to change into their costumes. So that was a rather intimate setting where I got to meet several of the contestants that competed. It just so happened at that time the Miss Michigan was Miss America. And I thought, well, this will be cool because I'm from Michigan and she's from Michigan, but she was not friendly. The friendliest one was Susan Anton, whom I got to meet and later provided my wife and I, my second wife and I, tickets to her show. we celebrated our anniversary, and at the end of the show, she mentioned to the crowd that was assembled there that Buzz and Kathy were celebrating whatever anniversary it was. We had 2 free tickets, center stage, and I have a nice letter from her. So I got, there was a benefit to there. They would bring in on a weekly basis. They would have Philippine bands come in. If you sat in the front row, you got a free show because the women didn't wear any underwear. And what was funny about it is these shows were held in the same building that the movies were held in, which was also where we had mass every day.
Mm-hmm.
But that we did get a steady complement of movies, the Filipino bands, and then we had the New Christie Minstrels come in, and Sunshine Delegation with Susan Blair, I think her name was, and like I said, the NFL players, which was kind of neat.
Mm-hmm.
But the Miss America was even neater because they used our office and we got to really talk to them.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, were there issues with things like drug use on the base?
Funny you should ask that. Any kind of drug we wanted and some I never heard of were available. I never have taken drugs and never will, other than prescribed. And at one point we had a black gentleman who, because of his drug abuse, needed to be escorted to Long Binh prison.
Mm-hmm.
And I was chosen to escort this gentleman in a C-130 to Long Binh. And my orders were, as if he decided to jump out of the C-130 over Vietnam, let him go, but make sure that you got his records to Long Binh.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy was pretty strung out on drugs, and he was telling me that when he got back to the States, he was going to tell Nixon to make sure that I was one of the first people that he would get out of there, and that type of thing. He was fried.
Mm-hmm.
But the drug abuse appeared to be more prevalent amongst the black Navy guys than it was the white. The whites, if you want to consider alcohol a drug, that was our drug of choice.
Yep.
I can remember many nights because our barracks was right next to the enlisted men's club. And if you sat around a table with 9 of your guys and you're only paying 50 cents to $1, it was 50 cents for a beer and $1 for a mixed drink. After each guy bought a round, that's 9 drinks. And their idea of rum and Coke was this much Coke and that much rum. So there were nights where I literally crawled from the EM's club up the stairs to the barracks. And I guess that was your way of... More of that happened early on because you wanted... I guess I felt that if I was going to die, I didn't want to know about it.
Mm-hmm.
And as you were there and getting close to leaving, you avoided the place. No, we actually made our own Kahlua in the Paraloft. One guy's wife would send all the ingredients, and we would cook it up, and we would drink Kahlua. And we also, at Christmas time, I remember the one family sent a Christmas tree, a small one, and we had a train set, which we put on that table I mentioned. And I hate for it to sound like Club Med, but in a way it was for us. I mean, we celebrated Christmas. We had Kahlua, we had chocolates, we had good food at the chow hall, and the train set and the tree. I mean, it was just like being at home without your family, but you had this inherited family of all the rest of the parachute riggers.
Now, with the drug business, was the use of it enough to kind of affect the performance of the unit, or was it stuff people did when they were off? Or
I can only speak for the Paraloft, and we didn't have any black personnel in the Paraloft. Whether it affected their work, obviously it must have for this guy to get caught and get busted. He's the only one I've really seen, and we didn't have a lot of black personnel. There was one that I was a friend with, and I don't think he was privy to the drugs. I was accused of being a racist over there because one night a black first-class petty officer came in and told me to do his laundry, and I told him that I wasn't his nigger and that I wasn't going to do his laundry. He could do it himself. And I was labeled a racist. And it was not long after that I had to escort this guy with no weapon. They wouldn't issue me a weapon to Long Binh, and I got him there, successfully turned him over to the MPs, slept that night in an air-conditioned building, a little teeny building next to the airstrip, and then they flew me back to my base the next day. I actually had flight time over in Vietnam during the Tet of 1969.
Then?
No, it would have
70?
been. It would have been 1969. I went up with the Army medevac. I befriended a chief warrant officer who flew a helicopter medevac, and I went flying with him, much to the officer of the day told me I better not get shot down. But we got lost over the U Minh forest, and we did get back. I do recall seeing tracers come up at us. We picked up wounded Arvin, who was wrapped like a mummy, and sometime during the flight, the blanket went out the bay door, and then he vomited, so we had vomit swirling around in there. And we had also picked up a Vietnamese woman who was ready to deliver a baby, and we dropped them both at a hospital. I had no idea where, and then they flew us back, and that was my experience during Tet.
Right. In general, how would you characterize the morale on the base while you were there?
In the Paraloft, it was pretty good. I mean, we were a pretty tight-knit group. There wasn't a lot of infighting or anything. We all had varied interests, which we each took an interest in the other person's. One of the guys I was with was he ranked number 3 in the state of New Mexico as a chess player. There was one from New York, the one from Kansas. There was 2 from the state of Washington. Those are the only ones I can remember. But morale was pretty good. I mean, you were there, you were stuck there, you knew you were going to be there 365 days, which is exactly what I served. And there was one point when I first got there, we had a commander that would put out a little newspaper about our group. And he would lie in there, he would talk about how he missed his wife and everything, and he was living with a Vietnamese woman, a hooker. And so one night we got drunk, and I took a hand grenade. It was actually a smoke grenade. That's the other thing that was in the vest, a smoke grenade. And I put that under the wheel of his Jeep. And I knew it wasn't going to kill him, it was just going to scare him. And when he took off in the Jeep, it went off, and that's the last I saw him. He never came out of the trailer he lived in until his tour was up, and then a new commanding officer came in. But this guy would just go on and on about how he loved his wife and everything, and here he's shacked up with this Vietnamese woman.
Now, did he keep her on the base, or did he take the Jeep to go with her?
No, he kept her on the base. He was not one of my better commanders.
Yeah, how much of a turnover was there in personnel? You're there for a year, and does everyone pretty much rotate out by the time you do?
Yeah, there were people there by a few months before I got there, and they would transition out before I did. And we kept, you knew exactly how many days, you were a double-digit midget, and then you were a single-digit midget, and it all had a little bit of status to it, they would refer to you, boy, when you got down to under 10 days, I mean, you didn't stand duty, you pretty much took it easy because you wanted to get out of there. Now, because I had befriended this Vietnamese woman, I, with about 4 weeks left, refused to eat in the chow hall because I was afraid she might poison me. So we went over and stole a pallet of LERPs, long-range patrol meals, and you just add hot water to them. So the last 4 weeks I was there, I lived on LERPs, and they had pretty good taste. I mean, there were certain ones were really good. The one I really liked was like ham and the potatoes, scalloped potatoes. And you just added hot water and you ate them. The chili was pretty good, so that's what I lived on the last 4 weeks. And then the guys that were in the Paraloft, they would go to breakfast and they'd bring me stuff back, which they knew she hadn't touched.
Now, so that basically she was figuring that you should be just staying and replacing her husband or something? And,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that wasn't going to happen. I mean, I should have been a priest over there. I was celibate. I didn't go visit any bars to take one of the hookers to bed or anything like that. I was afraid of getting something.
Well, the whole was probably good for your health.
That's debatable.
All right. Did you have much of a sense over the course of that year of sort of how the larger war was going, or did you just pay attention to your own little corner of the world?
No, the newspaper that I mentioned, the Jack Staff, with its skewed figures, gave us a little bit of an idea of what was going on. And then we had the Armed Forces Network that we picked up. More so when there was a game day. I mean, the big thing was when we had the Army-Navy game, and being that I was in the Navy, we went up on top of the barracks and put Beat Army, and I'm sure they had Beat Navy on theirs. We couldn't see it if they did, but we knew flying medevac that they would see it. And we pretty much got a general idea. I mean, terms like ripcord or, hill such and such, we had no concept.
Right.
I do happen to have a very large map of Vietnam. I got it out on the wall in the garage that had I had it there, and that's where I got it. I actually took it, the officer's room, I took it before I left and brought it home. Had I had access to that, I would have probably been more aware of what was going on. But I mean, there was activity around us. The Brown Water Navy would come in. In my estimation, they were a real group of animals. I seen one guy eat a glass one night, and it didn't cut his gums or anything. And I'm thinking, these guys are animals. And one had gone into town, came down with venereal disease, and he was a monster of a guy. And I was over to get they would put out a shot list. And because I'm so paranoid about needles, as soon as that list would come out, I'd go over to the doctor and say, let's get it over with. I don't want to have to sit and think about this for 2 months. And I watched this guy, the doctor gave him the shot of penicillin. I mean, this kid dropped to his knees. It hurt so bad. I vowed right then, I am not going to go through that. So I remained celibate over there. But I watched pretty much. You'd hear the stories about what they were doing on the Brown Water, and I knew what was going on with our guys flying the OV-10As and the helicopters. One of the helicopter door gunners was an AME, and so he would come into our shop and he would talk about certain things that they did, what have you.
So there still was a war going on in your part of the Delta.
Right. There was a war going on. There was no place that was the front line.
Right.
I mean, anywhere at any given time, you could have been shelled. You could have been shot going into town. I mean, there was one instance where an Army guy went to a bar in Canto, got drunk, took a prostitute up to her room, and she had razor blades and essentially turned him into a eunuch. And he walked from that bar to our pickup place, And the very next day, now this guy did survive. I don't know how you explained it to his wife. But the very next day, the Army went down there. They could follow that blood trail. They actually knew where that bar was, and they went and burned it to the ground. So there, I mean, there was VC sympathizers everywhere. The people that I saw, on the whole, were glad that we were there. I don't know if it's because we were in the Navy. We got paid twice a month. The Army only got paid once a month, so we were very popular. You had to watch the children. They would put razor blades in their fingers, and they knew that the American GIs carried their money up here in their pocket. And they could be jumping up, asking for candy and stuff, and they were so adept that they could cut your pocket with this razor blade and take your money without you even realizing it. So you could always tell the new guys coming into a base, because they had got nailed in Saigon, when their pockets would be cut, it'd be frayed. And I came home with all mine intact. I wouldn't let a kid get within 10 foot of me. You know, did him out. So that, you know, that I did have a lot of exposure to the people, and the ones that I seen basically were glad we were there.
And of course, when you're in the orphanage, you're dealing with Catholics, or at least the ones running it. I mean, were there Vietnamese nuns working in the orphanage, or who was there?
Yeah, they were Vietnamese nuns. I don't remember the head nun. She was very nice, and the thing I remember most is one room was row after row of baby beds, and the nuns would get up in the morning and they would start in the first bed and they would change diapers all the way through this room, and they had nowhere to hang the diapers, and they would wash them, and they would be on the railing of the pool, hanging from trees and stuff. And by the time they got to the last kid to change his diapers, another nun had started feeding them, and this was their daily cycle: clean, feed, clean. The older ones would be out playing. They had a small wading pool. And in most cases, from what I could see, the Amerasians kids were predominantly, there was a lot of black influence. The curly hair, very light-skinned blacks. And then there was the very obvious Vietnamese kids, which, and I guess I never asked, but I assumed that their families had been killed, and they ended up in the orphanage. My guess is there was probably 200 kids, ranging from newborns to maybe 3 or 4 years old. And the older ones did help the nuns try to keep the place clean. It didn't smell. I mean, it wasn't oppressive. And I just thought, man, you know, these nuns could really use some help. And I, the only phone call I was allowed to make the whole time I was there, I talked to my father and I said, can you speak to Mr. Upton and see if we can't get washers and dryers for the orphanage. And I received a letter from Whirlpool saying they were on the way. I showed a guy how to vent the dryers, how to hook everything up, and as far as I know, he did. His name was Uberoth. He was from the Ohio area.
So in Kanto, they had running water, so you could actually run a washing machine?
They had running water. They had electricity. I'm sure, I would be willing to bet, after having worked at Black & Decker, that the wattage or voltage was different than what we have here, and I would think that Whirlpool would have made that adjustment. I mean, you could buy things over there on the black market. You could buy refrigerators, and I know one guy that was with our outfit who, to my knowledge, is still in Vietnam, or he brought his bride back here, but he made money basically doing black market. And that helped support him and this Vietnamese wife that he had. There's only 2 guys that I know of that did that. This one guy, and then one guy in my outfit, in my paraloft, that I don't think he took her home, though. That's the one, the chess guy. He married, and he had this very official looking certificate with all kinds of stamps on it saying that he was married to this girl. So it wasn't a marriage made at the Catholic Church there or anything. It was done in town.
All right. Are there other kind of events or things that are going to stand out in your mind about that year in Vietnam that you haven't run the story here yet?
Just that it took a whole year out of my life, and it's not, I didn't know the full effect of what that year was going to do until I got home. And then it took me 40 years to realize what it did. Okay.
Well, let's follow up the story a little bit. You count down your days. It's finally your day to go. Are you able to leave on schedule?
Left on schedule. By now we're back into the monsoon season. This is September. We flew into Tan Son Nhut and landed. I could see the Freedom Bird, as we called it, sitting out on the tarmac occasionally between the sheets of rain. A civilian aircraft with American civilians on it, because of the weather, was forced to land at Tan Son Nhut. So we're sitting in the terminal with all these civilians, and lo and behold, I meet a guy who knew my father, and he was from Reese or Saginaw, someplace like that. And we talked, and meanwhile I'm thinking, and I'm this close to going home. And Tan Son Nhut got shelled pretty regularly. So the rain let up a little bit. We made a dash for the bus. The bus drives us out to the plane. We all get situated. It's hot in there, so it's just oppressive. And we sat, and we sat, and we sat. We sat there for about an hour in the plane, and I'm thinking, this is not good. We're going to get, a mortar's going to come in, we're going to get hit. I was expecting a loud cheer when we taxied and lift off. Not a word. You could have heard a pin drop. And then it was a 18-hour flight we flew right from Tan Son Nhut, commercial aircraft, to San Francisco International. And we really didn't get a lot of time to sleep because the stewardesses, from the crying stewardesses we had when we landed to these very elated ones, anything you wanted to eat or drink, they were feeding us. It just seemed like every hour, but I know it wasn't, but they kept us fed and everything. And they were so grateful. That's the one thing I noticed. And then we landed at San Francisco International.
All right. And what sort of reception do you get there?
I knew what to expect. So immediately upon deplaning, I made it up to the terminal and didn't run into anybody. I went into the bathroom, and on the top of my sea bag, I had my civilian clothes. I took off my military uniform, stuffed it in my sea bag, and I put on civilian clothes, which didn't really hide the fact that here I am, almost black from suntan, and the Navy allowed you to have sideburns down to here, so I grew sideburns. When I was over in Nam, I had my head shaved, so it was really dark, and then I had these sideburns, and some of the younger guys made me hippie beads to wear. So I had these hippie beads, dark, very dark, and then the sideburns, and my hair had bleached out. And I went to the bar at the airport, and I said, I want 3 tequila sunrises, right here, 3 of them. Because I had a 4-hour layover before flying. My orders said I was to go to Chicago. Well, I flew into Chicago, but I planned on flying into Saginaw and then driving back to Great Lakes to get discharged. So that's what I did. I landed in Saginaw, and my father and my then first wife walked right on by me and didn't even recognize me because I had lost weight. We didn't have real milk. We didn't have real bread. Didn't have real ice cream. So all those staples that Americans are used to, we didn't have. So when you're not getting whole milk and when you're not getting bread like we are accustomed to here, we had rye bread. in the heat, in the sweating, you lost weight. I came back at about probably 175. So, and that's the change that you had to put up with. But they walked right on by me, didn't even know me. And then a week later, I went to my first class reunion, and I can remember walking down in the basement of this place where we had it, and nobody knew who I was, which was kind of unique.
Now, had the Navy made any effort to get you to re-up, or were they just trying to
yes. Oh, yeah. When I was over in Vietnam, mine was a critical rate. The working on ejection seats. $10,000 tax-free. They were going to give me my second-class petty officer stripes if I re-upped for 4 years. I said, no, I'm not interested. So then they sweetened the pot. We'll pay you $10,000 tax-free, and you'll go to officers candidate school. And I said, not interested. So I left them unhappy, and I didn't re-up. I didn't see any future in the Navy. I don't like being on aircraft carriers. I'm not a real good swimmer, so if a boat were to go down, I would sink or swim. And I had a family. And the biggest part of being in the military is the separation. I was fortunate in the bases that I went, I was able to have my wife and our young girl with us. But that year in Nam, that just, you know, letters only say so much, and you miss so much of that growing period of your child. And then when you get home, you find that your child and your wife have their daily routine, and now you're disrupting their daily routine. And it doesn't take long to realize that you're disrupting it. And in the long run, we grew apart. I kind of grew this way, she grew this way. We did have another daughter together. I basically stayed in the marriage because of the two girls. And then at the point where one was in high school and the other one was getting near going to high school, then we divorced.
Now, aside from sort of that sort of side effect of having been in the military and so forth, how else do you think your experience kind of either physically or mentally affected you?
Well, after divorcing my first wife, I remarried, and there was some talk about me possibly having PTSD. And so I went, this is when we lived out in Nevada, and I went to Las Vegas to the VA, sat down with a gentleman much like we're doing here, just talked about stuff, and he said, as interesting a person as you are, you do not have PTSD. And then I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, of which I received daily medication. I have 89 radioactive seeds implanted in my prostate. I chose not to have the invasive removal. And a friend of mine whose husband received 100% disability for other things, not related to Vietnam, she sent me an email and said, how's your appeal going on your prostate cancer? And I said, I never gone to the VA about it. And she informed me that if you spent 1 day in Vietnam and came down with a whole list of stuff that basically is related to the Agent Orange, that you were entitled to compensation. And she impressed upon me that I earned that. I earned the right to go and get treatment. So I went to the VA here in Lansing, and we're sitting there, and I'm giving all the guys the details of this brachytherapy on the prostate cancer. And my wife Kathy saw a thing on the window that said PTSD, and she said, and you have that? And the guy said, does he? And she said, yes, he's got that. She said, this is not the same man that I remember when we were in high school together. So he put in a claim on that. And then he referred me to a psychologist who I started seeing on a regular basis. And through his copious notes, it was determined that yes, indeed, I do have PTSD. I have anger issues, maybe some survivor's guilt. I don't have a Purple Heart. Pretty much lived at a Club Med, and you know, and then the Agent Orange stuff. And the list is very long. There's Parkinson's disease, of which one gentleman in my group of PTSD guys, he's got that. Diabetes type 2, which I've been diagnosed recently with. The severe acne you hear about, the cancer. Because we were next to that concrete place, I don't know if it had a direct correlation, but I was diagnosed with Barrett's esophagus, which is a precancerous condition of the throat, of which when I went and had a civilian doctor here in Lansing do the EGD, he said I was never diagnosed with it. And for 15 years in Vietnam, or in Nevada, I took Prilosec. I was a walking poster boy for Prilosec. I have since gone to the U of M. I was referred there, and I do have Barrett's esophagus. I don't know if it's due to the concrete dust, but everything lumped into that whole year has left me angry with the military, angry with the VA. Almost had an incident here last weekend. My wife and I go to the lighting parade that they had here. We get there at 5 o'clock. I have a nice place set up where I can shoot photos because I'm a photographer. Sometime during the parade, there's a fire or some catastrophe, so you've got all these emergency vehicles leaving the parade. They're coming down the street. They turn on the corner where we're sitting. All the people move over in front of me, and then they don't want to move back to where they were at. And I'm losing my cool. And one guy said, I've been here since 5 o'clock. I picked this spot because I want to shoot pictures. Well, I was back there since 5 o'clock. I said, that's not the point. You're standing in my way. And my wife she knows when I'm about ready to lose it, so she calmed me down. And I have a hard time, I'm a big sports fan. If we go to a game, I have to be on the aisle. I cannot sit in the middle of an aisle.
Middle row, yeah.
In the middle of the row, unless I have my wife on one side of me and somebody I know on the other, which happened down in Detroit. I had her sister and my brother-in-law sitting on one side, my wife and another sister-in-law sitting on the other side. I didn't feel anxious with the people behind me or the people in front of me, but it never dawned on me when I was married to my first wife. I had season tickets for the Saginaw hockey team. It never dawned on me that I had this problem because the season tickets I had, my seat was on the aisle. And the players that I took pictures of sat across the aisle from me, so I knew everybody, and everybody knew each other there.
Yeah.
And it never dawned on me. So now when we go to those places, and there's a lot of places she will not really let me go to because of that. Aisle seats are hard to get to begin with. And we did go to a Yankees game, the Tigers and the Yankees, down at Yankee Stadium. And my sister-in-law wanted me to walk down through their hallway of champions, if you want to call it that. They have all these big pictures. Yeah. I get halfway through that. By now, I have no color left. I'm hyperventilating almost to the point. My hyper vigilance is at an all-time high, so I don't feel comfortable. So I said, we got to go back to the seats. And then when I got back there, I was able to decompress. even though there was 4 people on this side of me I didn't know, but I did speak to them, and they, you know, I didn't tell them I had PTSD, but you know, we got along and everything. But that's something that that's the worst.
And is that kind of, you think that's sort of connected to that whole business of just not being able to trust the civilians or the people who were there or who might be doing what?
It's the trust of the people that were there, Americans included. There were officers I didn't trust. I wouldn't trust them let's put it this way, I wouldn't take a bullet for them. There was the 24/7 of being under possible attack. I like to be on the go all the time now. I cannot stand, I mean, this is a beautiful home that we live in, and I don't like staying here because I was cooped up in Nam. You know, if she says, let's go do something, let's go. And I think that's a problem with that year in Nam. We have to, the psychologist, it took him a long time for him to get me to go to the group. I refused to go to the group. I vowed I would never buy a hat that said Vietnam veteran. I now have 2. I was content to have Vietnam veteran plates on my car, because when you're in a car, nobody knows who you are. But when you go to a group meeting and you're, you know, and we all meet before we go into the meeting, and we're all standing there with the Vietnam veterans hats, it's like a bonding. But I refuse to call them my brothers. I was part of a group that started the Saginaw chapter of the Vietnam Veterans of America, which I understand is no longer in existence. And at one of the meetings prior to becoming a charter group, they were talking about brothers, and I stood up and I said, look, ain't none of you guys here are my brothers. Some of you I wouldn't want for brothers. So I don't want to hear that anymore, because I don't feel, when we went over singularly, we didn't go over as a group. You had to form your own friendships with the people that were there. Some of them you didn't want to call brothers. I mean, there's things that I did over there that I'm not proud of, that me and my friend did, that, you know, was not something that you'd call nice. But that year shaped you. It actually crushed any dreams that I had. My initial thing was to graduate from college, be a football coach, and teach biology and history. That never happened. The closest I've come is I've been a substitute teacher. And then when you find out, you know, how can you go 40 years and not realize that you have these problems, and they ask you, what did you do? Coping skills. I've written 3 books, got them published. I covered auto racing. I worked for a hockey team. I did things that helped me deal with something I didn't know I had. And they took a year out of my life, and they didn't teach me anything to help me on the outside world. And it took somebody whose husband draws 100% disability to get me to even go to the VA, because I didn't want anything to do with them. And then through my psychologist copious notes, I've been able to draw 70%, which is very high for PTSD. You know, and when I go see him on Thursday, I'll tell him about this incident and how Kathy kept me from either sporting, you know, mouthing off to these people, or, you know, heaven forbid, throw punches. I mean, there was one guy I would have gladly set my camera down, and you know, he was a lot younger than I was, but you don't think about that. You just think of how rude these people are. I did have my Vietnam veterans hat on, but I had a hood on my jacket because it was cold. But I found that after a while, I wouldn't even put down Vietnam veteran on any job applications, because I was immediately labeled as a druggie, as someone who could have possibly killed babies, could have possibly helped wipe out a village. Maybe indirectly I did, I don't know. I mean, I worked on aircraft that went in and shot up villages and what have you. But it's taken 40 years for me to realize all this. And as you can see, you know, I've kept pictures. I've given stuff to Bruce Whipple and his traveling display. I'm more apt to admit that I have these problems, and I know they'll never go away. PTSD does not go away. The first symptoms I had was the night sweats, the nightmares, and I didn't really have any trauma other than the helmet thing. But it's a cumulative effect of being over there 365 days and being under constant hypervigilance. And you know, like if we fly, not so much Oriental people bother me, but because of my hypervigilance, if a guy gets on the plane and has a turban on, I want to know where he's sitting, because nobody's going to take a plane over that I'm on with box cutters. I'll take getting cut up with box cutters. I mean, I've cut myself with one, you know. But you go into this state of hypervigilance, and you're very wary of all your surroundings. Even at a ball game, I'm very aware of what's going on. I'm tuned into the game, but I know exactly what's going on behind me. Now, some of the guys talk about 4th of July. 4th of July does not bother me. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I didn't have those big guns going off. I could hear the guns going off, but they were so far out.
Yeah. Well, you weren't getting mortared or rocketed or that kind of thing. So
none of that. So there was no, and you know what to expect on the 4th of July. The things that bother me now, taps. God bless America. You start playing taps and I become a piece of putty. I just kind of melt. And I don't belong, for my own reasons, to any service organizations. They didn't want me when I came back, but they want me now because the World War II vets are dying and they want to keep their thing going. I'm not interested in sitting in a bar and listening to somebody else tell war stories. It's just not me. And in this book here, I have 2 stories about Vietnam. The Vietnam that the United States government wanted you to think was going on, and then the real Vietnam, the one that I saw, because I dealt closer to the people. I wasn't hand-to-hand combat. I just saw a really unique people that here we are over there destroying their land with Agent Orange. And I never thought I was exposed to it. I had a Marine say to me, "Did you eat over there?" "Well, yeah." "Did you shower?" "Yeah." Were you there 365 days? "Yeah." You were exposed to Agent Orange. Whether it was dumped someplace else, but it'll drift. And like I said, the nearest forest was probably 2 football fields away. Everything else was level. And this is in the Delta.
Now, given sort of what your own experiences have been, what do you think, or how do you react to kind of just the stories of sort of our continuing involvement in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and the Guard and Reserve troops who keep going over again and again?
I support the troops. I don't agree with the war. Like Vietnam, you'd have thought that the government would have learned. I mean, this is another type of warfare, kind of a guerrilla warfare. You got these Afghanis and what have you. They're holed up in holes and they do their damage and then they scatter. Same way it was done in Vietnam. I don't think we should be over there. As far as I'm concerned, it's a religious war. I think Bush's hunt for Osama bin Laden, I don't want to make us political, but I think he did it for his father, who couldn't get it done, and then he didn't get it done, so then it was all dumped on Obama to get it done. I'm not in favor of the war, and sometimes it hurts when I see commercials on TV that they celebrate these guys coming back by giving them tickets to sporting events and stuff like that. That bothers me because nobody did that for us. And
but it's at least an improvement that they're
it's an
treating better now.
improvement. And since I bought those hats, there's been on several occasions people have come up and said thank you, which 40 years too late, but it chokes you up.
Better than nothing.
Yep.
All right. Well, it makes for a pretty good story at any rate. I'd like to kind of close out here by thanking you for taking the time to tell it to me today.
Not a problem. And like I said, that their thing on PTSD is something you can take with you if you want to use it.
You
That's
can add it
fine.
to the file. All right. Here we are.